Hi, I'm responding to the video, Strong Atheism is Wrong. Forgetting the guy's name, I apologize. I recorded this video yesterday, but I fucked up. It was like, I don't know what the problem was, but I had to reset my iMac so that it would work. There are a couple of things that you said in your video, and if I'm misunderstanding you, because you were very complex in what you said, and I tried listening to your other videos, so if I misunderstood, then I apologize. But I felt that there were a number of things that needed to be said, and these are either corrective of what you've said, and you can respond to them, or apparently I might be agreeing with you. I was a little confused on your language. But it seemed to me that what you were saying, and what I've seen written frequently, is the difference between hard or soft atheists or complete atheists versus, less complete atheists, whatever the language is. It's the difference between someone who says that they have absolute proof that there's no God versus an atheist who says that the likelihood of God is very, very unlikely, or that there's simply no evidence, and that those are two different kinds of things. Now, the thing that I see atheists writing about repeatedly in their writings is that they've never met an atheist that's a hard atheist that believes that, and there's a reason for that. So there's sort of a straw man thing going on here where people say, oh, atheists claim they've got evidence there's no God and that they can absolutely prove there's no God. Well, prove that. What are you talking about? Well, atheists never say that, and there's a reason. Most atheists have a scientific worldview, and anybody who even has a cursory knowledge of scientific worldview knows that there are a number of things about it that are very odd that most laymen don't get. And it's something that it would be very difficult for me to explain because it's a very logistically complicated explanation, but in science you never disprove anything, believe it or not. You can't disprove anything. That's not how science works. You either have a whole bunch of evidence for something which proves that it's the best theory in existence, or you either have very little evidence and therefore it isn't the best theory in existence. And in reality, all theories are revised. All of the theories of the Middle Ages on physics have all been replaced, and yet they worked at that time. But in a sense, they were all wrong. I mean, it's sort of funny to say, but Newton's ideas were right, but they were misleading because we found out that the universe works a lot more complexly than he thought, and that what he thought was real is only real on the ground. It has very little to do with gravity, with planets, etc. So we're always revising theories, and theories are only as true as we have evidence for them. Now, as far as God is concerned, there isn't anyone with a scientific worldview who's going to tell you that God absolutely does not exist, we've disproved God, because a scientist would know that you don't disprove anything. You either fail to prove something, or you have lots and lots of evidence that looks like you're proving something. So you never absolutely prove anything, and you never absolutely disprove anything. You either just have lots of evidence, or you have very little. Now, the reason that people are so cocksure in their statements about, God being a delusion, is the fact that there are three states that a theory can be in. One is that it can have lots of evidence. One is that it can have little or inconclusive evidence, or evidence with lots and lots of attempts to get evidence for the theory, but some of them have failed. So you have inconclusive evidence. But then there are things where you can have absolutely no evidence whatsoever. Those are completely rare. In fact, having no evidence for something is only true of a very few things, like God. Doesn't that tell you something? I mean, even the most cockamamie theories might have a little bit of evidence for them. But God is right up there with creation science, It's something where all of the evidence is bogus. So you're dealing with something that has not one shred of evidence. The question is, why would you want to believe in something that has no evidence? Doesn't it make you suspicious? But you're right. There's no way of disproving God. But I talk too fast, because there is a way of disproving some things that have nothing to do with science, because they have to do with the steps that one takes before one gets to science, steps that have to do with logic. For instance, if I were to say that I have a theory that circles have four sides and that squares are circular, I can pretty much disprove that theory, not because I've run an experiment, not because I can disprove things with science, but because the sentence isn't even meaningful. There's no reason to believe that there are square circles or circle squares. What we've done is violated the concept of definition, and we've disproved something by virtue of the fact of not having evidence against it, by showing that it is nonsensical. So, for instance, the philosophers at the beginning of the last century used to say that the way you disprove things logically in a way you couldn't with science was to show that certain questions in science, like what is the meaning of life, were actually meaningless statements. So they weren't false because there was evidence against them. They were false because they weren't even meaningful statements. Now you're probably saying, what the hell does this have to do with God? Most of the definitions that I've ever seen of God are definitions that, once they're compared to the physical universe, once they're compared to basic logic, once you analyze the sentences that describe them, they are in fact meaningless. Now we all know that a God that is omnipotent, a God that is all-powerful, and a God that is all good can't exist. We don't have to go through that. We all know why that is. But there are numerous issues like that, things that make no logical sense, that can't be explained. Can God create a boulder? We've all heard this a million times before. Can God create a boulder that he himself could not lift? Well, if he can't lift it, then he's not all-powerful. But if he can't create something he couldn't lift, then his creative powers are also limited. So the idea of a God that's described, and remember, we're always describing gods in these extreme terms. When you describe gods in extreme terms, you're essentially saying that God is a circle that's got sides. It's very simple. The point is that you probably could come up with a definition of God that doesn't contradict itself. But if you did, you'd have a definition that almost no one who is a theist would recognize or embrace. The only people who would embrace it would be maybe philosophers in colleges somewhere, or maybe a few mystics. But most of those definitions are so vague that we then get back into the argument of ambiguity. So what are we to think of a word that either can't be proved and never could be proved, one. Number two, contradicts itself in some way. Three, is meaningless in how it is stated. Or if we make it meaningful and we make it possible to be true, we have to make its definitions so ambiguous and so vague that, again, it's almost meaningless in and of itself. The God concept is a delusion. It is a concept that just does not work no matter how you look at it. And you don't have to have the kind of evidence against something like that. There are no hard atheists because no one needs to be a hard atheist, because we're talking about something that is nonsensical to begin with. There's no need to run experiments to disprove nonsensical things that are irrational to begin with. I'd like to get a response from you. I don't get a lot of responses on YouTube. I think people are scared of me or something. This is Skeptic Sage, reminding everybody that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I wish everybody peace. Good night.